God leads his dear children along. In shady green pastures so rich and so sweet, God leads his dear children along. Where the waters cool flow bathes the weary one's feet, God leads his dear children along. Some through the waters, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through great sorrow, but God gives a song in the night season and all the day long. Sometimes on the mount where the sun shines so bright, God leads his dear children along. Sometimes in the valley, in darkest of night, God leads his dear children along. Through sorrows befall us and Satan oppose, God leads his dear children along. Through grace we can conquer, defeat all our foes, God leads his dear children along. Some through the waters, some through the flood, some through the fire, but all through the blood. Some through great sorrow, but God gives a song in the night season and all the day long.
Amen. Amen.
Amen. All right, you may be seated. Great song based on Psalm 23. Psalm 23:6. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Amen.
All right, Proverbs, please, in your Bible, chapter 31. And the message is entitled this morning, The Value of Virtuous Womanhood. Proverbs 31, and normally we just start with verse 10 and go from there, but I'd like to actually start from verse 1 this time and read through the end of the chapter, and then I want to make some comments along the way. Today is my purpose is to encourage every one of you ladies. There have been times that on Mother's Day I felt like the Lord wanted me to exhort ladies to biblical behavior where it was not there, but that's not my purpose today. That may happen in the course of the message, but my purpose is to encourage you. So in the spirit of encouragement, the Bible does say in the book of Proverbs that a merry heart doeth good like a medicine. And what I want to do today is two things. First of all, I want to tell you that I'm going to do my best to lift up you ladies and give you a shot in the arm, vitamin B12 or vitamin C, whatever it is you think you need. I hope it will be that for you. But I also want to say, there's nothing, the Bible doesn't say that we can't have a little levity when it comes to mothers-in-law. So for a long time, my wife's mother attended church here when she lived here, the whole time she lived here. And she moved back to Illinois, so I don't get to tease her like I used to. But she was my mother-in-law, and I was blessed, I am blessed with a good mother-in-law. However, she loved it when I told mother-in-law jokes. She loved it. She laughed big as anybody did. So, you know what? A little fun won't hurt to start with here. So let me give you a couple of notes about the sentiment that some have toward mothers-in-law. A justice of the court was asked not long ago by a man, Sir, will you please tell me what is the extreme penalty, the most extreme penalty for bigamy? And the judge smiled and said, 2 mothers-in-law. All right, well, that's one way to look at it. A blackmailer wrote the following note to a wealthy businessman. The note said, "Send me $5,000 or I will abduct your mother-in-law." And the businessman replied, "Sir, right now I am short of funds, but your proposition interests me." And then back in the old days when they used telegraphs for things, an undertaker telegraphed to a man that his mother-in-law had died and asked whether they should bury her, embalm her, or cremate her. And the man replied, "All 3. Take no chances." All right, now I do have one more to tell you, and I used to love to tell this one to my wife's mother, and she got a big kick out of it. And that is this, that a son-in-law got his mother-in-law a Mother's Day present. And it was a certificate that showed that he had bought her a funeral plot for Mother's Day. Bought it for her overlooking a beautiful valley. So she saw this and she read it and she said, "Oh, okay." And she took it in good spirit. All right, so a year went by and Mother's Day came again. And this time, the son did not get her a present for Mother's Day. So in the course of the conversation and days to follow, she asked her son-in-law, "You got me a present. You usually get me a present for Mother's Day, but you didn't get me one this time. How come?" And he said, "You haven't used the present I got you last year." My mother-in-law laughed really big at that. I've got one more, but I'm going to save that for another time. It's a little longer. Well, okay, so little levity raises the heart. But let's get back to some more touching stuff, shall we? From Proverbs chapter 31. Let me read to you starting with the first 9 verses, and then we'll launch into the next 10. But it's important that we get these because it sets up, verses 1 through 9, sets up what is being written in 10 through the end of the chapter. So, chapter 31, verse 1, you have the Bible saying in Proverbs, "The words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him." I'll just make one note. There's disagreement on who King Lemuel was. Some believe it was just another name, a euphemism for Solomon. Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. But there are other men who wrote Proverbs as well, and so some folks believe this King Lemuel was just so good that it was included in the book of Proverbs, that God wanted it there. I tend to think that King Lemuel is just a euphemism, a different name for Solomon. But if you take a different position on that, that's fine with me. I just wanted to make that note and move on. So the end of verse 1 says, "The prophecy that his mother taught him." So here she begins, verse 2. "What, my son? And what, the son of my womb? And what, the son of my vows?" She's just pointing out her position in reference to her son. "Give not," and here comes the advice, "give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, and for princes strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law, and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted or the justice. Give strong drink unto him that is ready to perish, and wine unto those that be of heavy hearts. Let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his misery no more. Open thy mouth for the dumb." Dumb, of course, someone who cannot speak. They are physically unable to talk. Open thy mouth for the dumb in the cause of all such as are appointed to destruction. So speak up for those who have no voice. And verse 9, open thy mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. Now, moms, would you agree that's all pretty good advice? Wouldn't you? And I think you'd want your son to follow that. You want your daughter to follow that advice. There is a songwriter who has a great hymn in our hymn book and in almost all hymn books that have Christmas hymns in them. He's the author of O Little Town of Bethlehem. His name is Phillips Brooks. And he was an American pastor. He lived from 1835 to 1893. Was a well-studied man, had a doctorate in divinity. And I can just tell you that a bachelor's degree in the 1800s is probably worth a PhD degree today. You know how things have degraded. So this man was well-studied, but he wrote that great hymn, A Little Town of Bethlehem. Well, he and his brother, when their mom died, they had a tombstone made for her, and this verse put there by her sons from Matthew 15:28. O woman, great is thy faith. Be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And that is something Jesus spoke to a lady who wanted healing. Forget if she wanted healing for her child or healing for herself, but she needed healing. And these are words the Lord spoke to her. O woman, great is thy faith. That was the verse put on the tombstone by these sons of their wonderful mother. And I can imagine she was a mother very much like the one that is giving us this advice in Proverbs chapter 31. Now let me read more of the chapter, and then I'd like to dive into it bit by bit and just see if I can give you some encouragement from it along the way. Look please now at chapter 31 and verse 10, and let me read this to you. It says, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that she shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She considereth the field, and buyeth it. With the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. If I can pause here. They did not have candles at this time. In the Old Testament and New Testament times, candles were not invented until later. But our King James translators used the word candle instead of lamp or oil lamp. They used the word candle because the King James Version was for the common people of England in the 1600s. And they did not, hardly any of them, have oil lamps, but they had candles. So they used that term. So, but the meaning here is she doesn't let her oil lamp run out of oil through the course of the night. She fills it up so it will burn all night long. That's the idea. She makes the preparation necessary. Verse 19, she layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. Ladies had to make their own string and their own cloth. And then from the cloth they made the clothes that their families wore. This was true throughout all of Bible times. It wasn't until later that different things came along, like the spinning wheel and other things came along where they could make this much easier. So maybe a spinning wheel was used here, but she had to make it by hand is the point. She stretcheth out, verse 20, her hand to the poor. Yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. She's not afraid of the snow for her household. For her household are clothed with scarlet. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is of silk and purple. Her husband is known in the gates, when he sitteth among the elders of the land. She maketh fine linen, and selleth it, and delivereth girdles, that's belts or sashes, unto the merchant. Strength and honor are her clothing. She shall rejoice in time to come. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. But a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. Now that is a fantastic chapter, isn't it? And it describes biblical womanhood, or we'll use the term virtuous womanhood. And I love that term because it's a term the world does not use anymore. They used to. But it's a term, when you think of a virtuous woman, you think of someone who follows the ways of morality, of truth, of Bible values. She's just a valuable woman. And so that is the Bible's description of what womanhood was, and of course is recommended throughout all the time that human beings live on this earth. That's the Bible's recommendation, but the culture we live in is a culture that values careers more than motherhood. It values self-fulfillment more than bringing a new life into the world. Modern culture teaches that the woman's place is in the workplace, that she should farm out her children to daycare instead of rearing a child that God gave you. So we do need to get back to the Bible, find out why we have mothers. What is a mom? What do moms do according to the Lord? Now our culture teaches that it's a bad thing to have children. You realize that, don't you? Unless it's a royal family having a child, nobility like Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, when they had their children, and going back to Princess Diana and her having her children and so forth. If it's a celebrity having a child, fantastic, especially if it's a homosexual couple that are having a child. Wow, they make a great big deal and rejoice at that. But they say we shouldn't be having any more children in this world because of global warming. More human beings on the planet, or warm bodies that just warm up the planet all the more. The globe is already overpopulated, they say. The food supply is already scarce, and you hear these arguments, thereby discouraging having children, which is in direct contradiction to God's command to human beings to be fruitful and what?
Multiply.
Yeah, be fruitful and multiply. And if God set up the human race to be fruitful and multiply, you can guarantee He set up the earth we live in to sustain the life God puts on it. That's just common sense. Now, if you're a mother with children of any age, still in the home, children still in the home, or you're a grandmother with grandchildren with whom you have the privilege of spending frequent time with. Your challenge to influence them for godly character, for biblical values, for eternal purposes, your challenge is probably harder than it's ever been, because the devil's inroads to children are more constant and varied than ever. And I would add that the devil is working harder than he ever has at turning young people into the broad road that leads to destruction, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. So he's working as hard as he can to corrupt the young people that God has put in our homes and in our lives. So mothers, with all that set up, I want to encourage you in your valuable labor today. And here's the layout I hope to follow. Point number 1 is, what does virtuous mean? Point number 2, what does a virtuous woman do? What are her character traits? Point 3, what is the benefit to the virtuous woman for her virtue? We tend to think we read this, and that's just so the husband can have a better home, and the children can be taken care of, and God's testimony will be enhanced. All of that is true, but what's the value to the woman herself for being a woman of virtue? And then point number 4, once I show you all this, what does a girl or a woman gain from knowing all of this? And then point 5, in simple terms, what does a family have when the lady of the house is a virtuous woman? What does the family have then? So let's follow that layout, and we'll get as far as we can this morning. Point number 1, what does virtuous mean? And all that I have to give you under this point and the next point comes from, I'm borrowing from one of the great preachers of the past. I want you to know that, because this is not what John Leonard thinks about it. This is what one of the great preachers of the past has said is so regarding this great chapter. So you have, first of all here, you have in verse 10, you have a general inquiry. Verse 10, a question: who can find a virtuous woman? And the rest of the chapter answers that question. But if I may point you back up to verse 2, that verse has 3 questions. Really, well, it's really one, but directed in 3 ways. And then verses 3 through 9 answer that question. So the chapter is a question and answer, question and answer. And normally we like that format, don't we? We like question, answer, answer. And we actually have that in this chapter. May I point out one more thing before I get to what the preacher said here about this. Verses 10 through the end of the chapter are laid out in Hebrew as an acrostic by the alphabet. So if we laid it out, it'd be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and so forth, and a word starting with each one of those letters to make this easy to remember. Acrostics were given usually for that purpose. I really want you to remember this, so here's a key to remember what this is. Now in English, it doesn't come out to A, B, C, D. In Hebrew, if you were to look at that, you'd have Aleph, Beth, Gimel, Daleth, and so forth, the Hebrew letters. And every word is the next letter of the alphabet from verse to verse to verse. But it's just good to know that. It's an acrostic for the purpose of memory, for the purpose of remembering this so the lady can actually live it and act it out every day. In other words, it's practical. Ladies are looking for practical help. I don't blame you. And God's got it right here in this chapter. So the first thing, getting back to the great preacher, he says you have in verse 10 a general inquiry after such a one, which is who can find a virtuous woman. An inquiry is a question. So first of all, it'd be letter A for him, but for the first thing under this is the person inquired after. That is, who is it that's asked about? And that is a virtuous woman. And his answer here is this: She is a woman of strength, virtue. So the word is. Though she's the weaker vessel, yet she's made strong by wisdom and grace and the fear of God. He says further, it is the same word, virtuous, virtue, that is used in the character of good judges. Make a note of Exodus 18:21. And you'll find there that when God was searching for men to be judges over the people under Moses, that virtue was a character quality those men must have to be good judges of the people of God. That means they were able men, men qualified for the business to which they were called, men of truth, fearing God, virtue. Can I add one more thing? This is not from the preacher, but from a different preacher. A Roman soldier, the best kind of Roman soldier was one who could be described with the term virtue. How about that? If we tend to think of virtue or virtuous as a feminine thing, folks, it's not. It is the idea of strength. So we ask a virtuous woman, we find the idea of this. A virtuous woman is a woman of spirit. Back to the preacher here, who has the command of her own spirit and knows how to manage others, her children, her servants. A lady that is pious and industrious and a helpmeet for a man. That's all from the preacher. So it follows that a virtuous woman is a woman of resolution who espouses good principles. Now, that I hope was helpful in understanding virtue and virtuous woman. However, you might want some more help. So I've got one extra thing here. Brother Sean, can I get your help here?
Sure.
And there's about 20 of these. Just give one to each family group, and I think we'll have enough. And this is a chart called the voluptuous woman versus the virtuous woman. And I made 20. That may not be enough, but share them as best you can here. And we'll get to that in a moment. A virtuous woman versus a voluptuous woman. I'm going to start on this. When you get your chart, you can catch up real quick here. Let's just take a quick look at this. The voluptuous woman, first of all, is described in the first 9 chapters of Proverbs. Especially, you can make a note on your chart, especially chapter 7. The voluptuous woman, the strange woman. A lot of contrast between her and this woman, described in Proverbs chapter 31. Thank you, brother. Anyone else need one that didn't get one? Okay. I'll pause for a moment. All right, so you see the first one, the voluptuous woman versus the virtuous woman. The second one there, the voluptuous woman is lewd, L-E-W-D. And you can look that up in the verses listed there, chapter 6, 24 and 2:17. The virtuous woman, however, is loyal. Loyal. Verse 11 of chapter 31, the heart of her husband doth safely trust in her. So you'll have no need to spoil. She's loyal. The voluptuous woman, thirdly, is a home breaker. The virtuous woman is a home maker.
Yeah.
Wow, that's good. Now, I've heard the term home wrecker. You heard that term?
Yeah.
And I actually worked with a woman when I was about 22, 23, 24, right in there. She was a home wrecker. She worked in my department. Another guy worked in our department. He was about probably 30. She was about the same. She was unmarried. He was married. But they were together 5-6 nights a week. We worked graveyard shift at Motorola in Phoenix, and they began to develop a relationship. And they were very public about their affection for each other, even not during work time, but break time and lunchtime at the workplace. And at one point, the wife of this man came running up to her as she was entering the work grounds of Motorola and yelled at her, "You're a home wrecker," among other things. And this girl was really offended by that. Well, I'm sorry, her feelings were hurt. But you can be a home, what's it say, a home breaker or a homemaker. And by the way, the home breaker is not always the other woman. Sometimes it's the woman who lives in the home that breaks the home. And ladies, you're a homemaker. You're a virtuous woman. The voluptuous woman, fourthly, is easy to find because she's out everywhere all the time. The virtuous woman is hard to find. Who can find a virtuous woman? A rare gem. And I've been to a lot of stores, very few stores have I seen rubies just laying around in the bargain bin at Walmart or something like this, you know. They're valuable. That's not how it is. So she's hard to find because she's of great value. The voluptuous woman is cheap. Proverbs 30 and verse 20. That says, "Such is the way of an adulterous woman. She eateth and wipeth her mouth and saith, I've done nothing wrong." The virtuous woman, on the other hand, is precious. More precious than rubies. The voluptuous woman there, the next one, she has outer beauty. You know, attraction on the surface. She looks good. The virtuous woman has inner beauty. And that's heart attraction. You can look at the verses there. The voluptuous woman works with her mouth. Lively lips, but no life. Out there in the world, they might say, lovely lips and swinging hips. Something like this. The voluptuous woman. But the virtuous woman, she works with her hands. A lovely life, producing lovely deeds. The voluptuous woman is religious. It's Proverbs 7:14 where she says, I've made my sacrifices. Now let's commit adultery together. That's my translation. The virtuous woman is right with God. Chapter 31, verse 30. Favor is deceitful. Beauty is vain. And the woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. She's right with God. The next one, the voluptuous woman, she's outside the home. That doesn't mean she's working in the flower bed. That means she's out on the street, out in public, out at the marketplace. She's just out all the time. The virtuous woman abides in the home. You want to find her? She's in her house. She doesn't have to go out sometimes, but the primary place she always is at home. And then the voluptuous woman does her husband nothing but harm. She might speak the right words, but her intentions are always to serve herself and anyone that can be taken advantage of to serve herself. That's what she does. The virtuous woman does her husband good, verse 12 says. She'll do him good and not evil all the days of her life. And then the voluptuous woman, she's on the loose at night. That's in Proverbs chapter 7. The virtuous woman, she's resting at night so she can awake early and attend to the needs of the home. Second to last, the voluptuous woman kills her victims. Proverbs 7 says, everyone that follows her ways, it leads to death. And the virtuous woman, she blesses her family. And then the last one, the voluptuous woman lives by lust. That's obvious in Proverbs 7. And the virtuous woman lives by love. Verse 20 of chapter 31, she stretcheth out her hand to the poor, reaches forth her hands to the needy. If she takes the trouble to help others who are of less fortune than her, then she will certainly love the people that are in her home. Now we get done with that, and does that help you understand a little bit better what a virtuous woman is compared to a woman of the world? Think so? Yeah, I thought this was terrific. So that finishes number one. What does virtuous mean? Let's go to point number two. What does a virtuous woman do? What are her character traits? And then you have, coming back to the old preacher, he says you have a particular description of her and of her excellent qualifications. And I have got it down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7. So let me get through these, and we'll probably have to stop then. But these are fantastic. These are all from the old preacher. So here's a description of her and her excellent qualifications. Point number two, what does a virtuous woman do? What's her character traits? Number one, she is very industrious to recommend herself to her husband's esteem and affection. Those that are good, he says, those that are good really will be good relatively. That means in relationships with others. A good woman, if she be brought into the marriage estate, will be a good wife and make it her business to please her husband. 1 Corinthians 7:34, listed as a cross-reference. That's what married people do, to please their husband, to please their wife. He says, though she is a woman of spirit herself, yet her desire is to her husband, to know his mind, that she may accommodate herself to it. She is willing that he should rule over her. So that's number one, very industrious to recommend herself to her husband's esteem and affection. Number two, the virtuous woman is one that takes pains in the duty of her place and takes pleasure in it. Her place is in the home. So she takes the duty, takes pains to do it well, and takes pleasure in doing it well. This is part of her character, and it's much enlarged here in the chapter. And I'm leaving out a whole bunch, but I'll give you one for instance of this one who takes pains in the home. For instance, he says, she hates to sit still and do nothing. Where do we get that? He cites verse 27. Would you read it with me, verse 27? Everyone together. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. So the preacher here says she hates to sit still and do nothing. I'm sure that doesn't mean that she never takes a break, never rests some, because we all have to do that at times. But the idea of just not accomplishing anything, that's just not in her nature. So number three, she is one that makes what she does turn to a good account, and does so by her prudent management of it. She does not toil all night and catch nothing. No, she perceives that her merchandise is good. That is what she works on, what she would sell, what she would do in the home. She perceives it as good. She is sensible that in all her labor there is profit, and that encourages her to go on in it. She perceives that she can make things herself better and cheaper than she can buy them. Now, I'll grant you that when this was written, Israel was not importing cheap goods from China like America does today. So in some cases, you can buy another one easier than cleaning out the old one. I get that. But there's still this idea of industriousness that the Bible promotes. Thirdly, she finds, under this third point, she finds by observation what branch of her employment brings in the best returns. And to that, she applies herself most closely. Number four, she takes care of her family and all the affairs of it. We're saying, what does a virtuous woman do? What are her character traits? Number four, she takes care of her family and all the affairs of it. Verse 15 says she gives meat to her household. Meat has the idea of just food. She gives to everyone their portion in due season, so that none have reason to complain. She, according to verse 27, she looketh well to the ways of her household. That's number 4. Number 5, she is charitable to the poor. And that's verse 20, which we read a moment ago. She is, get this now, she is as intent upon giving as she is upon getting. And boy, does that make her different from the people of the world. She is intent upon giving more than she is upon getting. She often serves the poor, notice, with her own hand. And she does it freely, cheerfully, with outstretched hand. That's number 5. Number 6, she is discreet and obliging in all her discourse, not talkative, censorious. You know what that means? Critical. Critical. Not peevish, as some women are. She knows how to take, let me back that up. Not censorious nor peevish, as some are, that know how to take pains. No, according to verse 26, she openeth her mouth with wisdom. The preacher goes on to say, when she does speak, it is with a great deal of prudence and very much to the purpose. You may perceive by every word she says how much she governs herself by the rules of wisdom. She not only, still quoting, she not only takes prudent measures herself, but gives prudent advice to others. And this, not as assuming the authority of a dictator, but with the affection of a friend and an obliging heir. Again, verse 27, in her tongue is the law of kindness. And he concludes his point by saying, all she says is under the government of that law, the law of kindness. And here's number 7. That which completes and crowns her character is that she, according to verse 30, feareth the Lord. Now, feareth here has the idea of reverence and awe and respect, giving place to one above herself. So with all those qualities that we've listed, she lacks not that one thing that is needful, which is to fear the Lord. She is truly pious. Pious in our day has taken on an air of like a negative sense. But in the Bible, piety, that's a good word. It means sincere in obeying truth, righteously. So she is truly pious. In all she does is guided and governed by the principles of conscience and a regard to God, because she fears the Lord. This is that which is here preferred far before beauty, that is vain and deceitful. Look again at verse 30. In fact, why don't you all read it with me, verse 30, together. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Favor here meaning the idea of comely, attractive in appearance. She's well favored by her external appearance. But that is deceitful. Here's what he says about beauty and favor being vain. Beauty recommends no one to God, nor is beauty any certain indication of wisdom and goodness. But beauty hath deceived many a man who made his choice of a wife by it. He says, there may be an impure, deformed soul lodged in a comely and beautiful body. Nay, many have been exposed by their beauty to such temptations as have been the ruin of their virtue, their honor, and their precious souls. It, Beauty is a fading thing at the best, and therefore vain and deceitful. So that which crowns her character is her godliness, fearing Christ. Now, if you'll give me just a couple more minutes, the restaurants don't open till tomorrow, so just give me a couple more minutes, okay? And because I want to go to point 3, and I want you to hear this, it's just so good. Point 3 is, what is the benefit to the virtuous woman for her virtue? You know, what does she get out of it? We know what the household gets out of it, but what does she get out of it? Well, the preacher says, and I'm still quoting the great preacher here, the happiness, this is the happiness of this virtuous woman. Number 1, 3 things. Number 1, she has the comfort and satisfaction of her virtue in her own mind. In verse 25 it says, strength and honor are her clothing. That strength and honor, like clothing, is in what she wraps herself. That is, she enjoys herself, and in which she appears to the world, and so that her strength of character, her strength and honor as clothing recommend herself and her character just by being herself, by being the woman that God made her to be. She enjoys a firmness and constancy of mind. Strength and honor are her clothing. She has spirit to bear up under the many crosses and disappointments which even the wise and virtuous must expect to meet with in this world. And this is her clothing, strength and honor, for defense as well as decency. In other words, the strength and honor of her character are such that when she is attacked or discredited, she knows how to consider that as worthless, because strength and honor are her clothing. She knows what is true of herself. So she has this comfort and satisfaction in her own mind. You see the number 1 benefit for the virtuous woman of being a virtuous woman? That's her benefit. Number 2, she is a great blessing to her relations. What is the benefit to the virtuous woman for her virtue? Well, she's a great blessing to her relations. Now, it's true that in these verses we're going to look at, it points out how her children are blessed by her, how her husband are blessed by the kind of woman that she is. And those are true points, but that's not the point I'm making here. She is blessed by her children for her character. She is recommended and praised by her husband for her character. She is the recipient of blessing because of how she's been a blessing to her family. Get that? So here's how the preacher words it. Her children grow up in her place, and they call her blessed. Look at verse 28. Would you read that with me? Verse 28, ready? Here we go. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. Now I would add, even though children are, this is me talking now, even though children are listed first and husbands second, I would add it's the husband's duty first to praise his wife. Because babies and children, as they grow up, they're only thinking about me, 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 me. They're not usually thinking about how great mom is to me. They're thinking about, I need this from mom, I need that from mom, I want that. And if I don't get it, I cry, I throw a fit, whatever. But if the children grow up hearing the husband praise the mom, praise the wife, praise her for her cooking, for her cleaning, for her work, how she takes care of the home, for her appearance, and the list goes on. If the children hear that, that, along with seeing the character and virtue of their mother, causes them to praise her. So, the preacher says, they, the children, give her their good word. They pray for her and bless God that they had such a good mother. Think about this. How many grandmas, moms are in nursing homes around the country, and their adult kids, grown up, never pray for their moms in those nursing homes? They feel alone enough already, but you won't even pray for her? Yeah, that is a great injustice. We must pray for them because they did mom. They pray for her and they bless God that they had such a good mother. By the way, the children who generally, this is me talking, the children who generally praise God and bless her that they had her as a mother generally didn't like her mothering when they were kids. Because the mother expected things of them, required things of them, disciplined things, withheld benefits when they acted poorly. That's a good mom. That's a good mom. And the kids don't enjoy it when they're little, but when they get older, they realize, yeah, mom was right about that. I did not deserve to go to. I did not deserve to have this and whatever. Back to the preacher again. He says, secondly, it is a debt to praise her, to pray for her and bless her. It is a debt those children owe her, a part of that honor which the fifth commandment requires to be paid to father and mother. Do you know the fifth commandment? Honor thy father and thy mother. It's a debt which children owe their mothers and fathers. It's a double honor that it's due to a good father and a good mother. That's what the preacher says. So that's the great blessing to her relations from the children. Here's from the husband. Her husband thinks himself so happy in her that he takes all occasions to speak well of her as one of the best of women. It is no indecency at all, but a laudable instance of conjugal love for husbands and wives to give one another their due praise. So she benefits from the praise of the husband. That benefits her, and from the praise of the children. And here's the third benefit. What's the benefit to the virtuous woman for a virtue? Number 3, she has a good word of all her neighbors. That's in chapter 31 and verse 30, the second part. It says, favor is deceitful, verse 30, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be what? Praised. She shall be praised. Now we know the praise comes from children and comes from the father, the husband, as well it should. But according to the preacher here, he says that she shall be praised by others outside the home. He says, as Ruth did, whom all the city of her people knew to be a virtuous woman. That's Ruth 3 and verse 11. You can write it down and take a look at it. Ruth did not make a show of herself. Ruth is only 4 chapters. That'd be a good read for you ladies today on Mother's Day. Book of Ruth. 4 chapters. She did not make a show of herself, and yet her loyalty to her mother, her faithfulness to her family, her decency, these were praised by others outside of her home. He says, virtue will have its praise. Do you know Philippians 4:8? If there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Such a woman is thought of frequently, and she is thought of for her virtue, and thought of with praise. A woman, the preacher says, a woman that fears the Lord shall have the praise of God and of men too. Now I want you to look up, this is the only cross-reference we'll look up. Would you look to Romans chapter 2, please? And we're practically done, I promise you. We're practically done. Romans chapter 2 and verse 29. You don't see this too often, but it is in the Bible, and it's good to know. Now, he's talking here at the end of Romans, and we're looking at chapter 2, the end of the chapter, Romans 2, end of the chapter. He's talking about being a Jew, but not being a Jew by race so much as being a Jew spiritually speaking. He's using that as a euphemism, that we're children of Abraham by faith. So verse 29, but he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart. Now we know what circumcision is in body, but the whole purpose of it was to show that you were a child of the covenant. In Jewish culture, men were circumcised to show that they belonged to the one true God. They were set apart. But for Christian people, that is not, the physical requirement is not there. Circumcision, being set apart to God in the heart, is of more value than circumcision of the body. So he says, he's a Jew which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, not in the spirit, and not in the letter, whose praise is not of men, but you see this? But of God. That is, a person, a Christian, who is so dedicated to following Christ, sacrificed in his own heart and mind to doing what God desires. That Christian has the praise of God. Therefore, do you not think that the virtuous woman who is dedicated to her role 100% that God has given her, shall she not also have the praise of God? So, back to the preacher, his point is, a woman that fears the Lord shall have praise of God and of men too. Now, these qualities of the virtuous woman and the many things in which they result, these are things that we all appreciate about mom. Why does mom work harder in the house, for the house, on the inside usually, but sometimes on the out? Why does she do that more than anybody else? Well, I know the husband has probably got a job that keeps him away 40 hours a week or whatever. But the home is her workplace. The home is where she lives. The home is where her heart is. And it shows by how she conducts herself in it and for it. All of these qualities we've listed here make the home a wonderful place in which to be. I heard a man one time, he was telling me it was a car repair place in Phoenix. And he said to me, here's my name and here's my phone number. He said, I live here. What he meant was he probably worked there 12 hours a day, about 6 days a week. But you know, he didn't look all that happy. When I come into my house, just walking into my house is a relief from all the other things going on in the world. And if it weren't for that lady right there, it would not be so. I could walk into a house that I own with no other person in it, and yeah, there'd be some relief, but not like I have with her. Amen? You men with wives, you children, you're grown up now. Didn't mom make it that way? When I was a kid, it was the same way. I could find refuge at home that I could not find anywhere else. Mom makes it that way. Amen? Yeah. Mom makes it that way. So tonight, I'm going to give you point 4 and point 5 because I'm out of time now. Point 4 is this: what does a girl or woman gain from knowing all of this? Now, I've told you all this great stuff. I've rehearsed it from the great preacher of the past. But ladies, what do you gain from knowing all of this? Well, I want to tell you. And then the last thing is, what in simple terms does a family have when the lady of the house is a virtuous woman? That's got something pretty special when the lady of the house is a virtuous woman. Now, in your bulletin, I gave you this outline. It's 2 pages, well, 1 page, front and back. This is from a preacher. If you want to write it down, this is not for me. You can write down the name of the preacher of the church. It's Pastor Vincent Sawyer from Faith Baptist Church. Pastor Vincent Sawyer, Faith Baptist Church, Corona, Queens, New York City. All right? Faith Baptist Church, Pastor Vincent Sawyer, Corona, Queens, New York City. No wonder New York City has more coronavirus than anybody. They've got a whole area of the town named after it. I know it was that way years ago. It's not because of the virus. But so I thought this might be a help to you. Priorities of an honorable mother on one side. Very good things he writes here. And what every child needs from a mom. And ladies, I don't want you to look at this and say, oh man, look at all this stuff I have to do. I would rather have you look at this and say, look at what my children can get from me that they can't get from anybody else. Look at how valuable I